This is a reading from the Buddhadhamma, the laws of nature and their benefits to life. Bhikkhu Payutto on Dependent Origination, Chapter 4, Paticcasamuppada, the Buddhist law of conditionality. Introduction. Basic definitions for the term Paticcasamuppada include dependent origination, dependent co-origination, and the origin of suffering dependent on co-conditionality. The Buddha presented the teaching of dependent origination, Paticcasamuppada, in two ways: general presentations, which do not specify each factor of the process, and detailed presentations listing each factor in a connected sequence. The general presentation usually occurs preceding the detailed presentation. The detailed presentation is found frequently in the scriptures, usually alone, without the general presentation. It expands on the general presentation, describing and analyzing each factor of dependent origination. General presentation. A. When this exists, that comes to be, with the arising of this, that arises. B. When this does not exist, that does not come to be, with the cessation of this, that ceases. 2. Detailed or applied presentation. A. With ignorance as condition, there are volitional formations. With volitional formations as condition, there is consciousness. With consciousness as condition, there is mind and body. With mind and body as condition, there are the six sense bases. With the six sense basis as condition, there is contact. With contact as condition, there is feeling. With feeling as condition, there is craving. With craving as condition, there is clinging. With clinging as condition, there is becoming. With becoming as condition, there is birth. With birth as condition, there is aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair thus come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. B. With the remainderless abandonment and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness, cessation of mind and body. With the cessation of mind and body, cessation of the six sense basis. With the cessation of the six sense basis, cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of becoming. With the cessation of becoming, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, cessation of aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is this cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Both of these formats can be divided into two parts: the process of origination and the process of cessation. The first sequence, the process of origination, is called the Cycle of Origination. It is also known as the forward sequence and is equivalent to the second Noble Truth. the origin of suffering. The latter sequence is called the cycle of cessation, or the reverse sequence. It corresponds to the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. The closing statements of the detailed presentation indicate that dependent origination deals with the origin and cessation of suffering. Most of the scriptural references to dependent origination end with these statements. There are, however, passages that end with the origin and cessation of the world. This bhikkhus is the origin of the world. This bhikkhus is the cessation of the world. In such a way the world originates, in such a way the world ceases. Here the words suffering and the world are interchangeable, which will be explained below. The detailed presentation of dependent origination contains 12 factors which are part of an interconnected cycle, without a beginning or an end. There is no first cause. For convenience of exposition, the Buddha chose ignorance as the most suitable candidate to place at the start of the list of factors, but this is not intended to imply that ignorance is the first cause. Occasionally, to prevent the misunderstanding that ignorance is the first cause, he inserted the following statement: with the arising of the taints, ignorance arises. With the cessation of the taints, ignorance ceases. The 12 factors of dependent origination, beginning with ignorance and ending with aging and death, are as follows: ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, mind and body, 6 sense basis, contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, aging and death. Sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair are results of the cycle of dependent origination, arising in the minds of those who have mental impurities. When they are faced with aging and death, these results, however, take an active role by leading to a further increase of mental taints, which are in turn the conditions for ignorance and a continued rotation of the cycle. In general, when presenting this detailed or applied format of dependent origination, comprising the entire 12 factors, the Buddha mentioned the forward sequence only as an introduction. When he wished to emphasize the direct human experience of suffering, he most often presented dependent origination in the reverse sequence. On some occasions, when he wished to highlight a particular factor, the Buddha began the detailed presentation with one of the intermediate factors. The presentation may begin with birth, feeling, or consciousness, and then be linked with the subsequent factors until the process reaches aging and death for the forward sequence, or traced back to ignorance for the reverse sequence. Occasionally, the process begins with a factor or problem not included in the group of 12, and is then connected to the process of dependent origination. In summary, the presentation of dependent origination is not fixed and does not have to mention all 12 factors. Although the 12 factors are said to be interdependent and act as conditions for one another, this is not the same as saying they are causes for one another. As a comparison, there are more conditions other than the seed itself that permit a plant to grow. Soil, water, fertilizer, weather, and temperature all play a part, and these interrelated conditions do not need to follow a set temporal sequence. Similarly, a floor acts as a condition for the stability or positioning of a table. Two, significance of dependent origination. The Buddha presented the principle of dependent origination as a law of nature, which does not rely on the emergence of a Buddha for its existence. The Buddha presented dependent origination as a natural truth in the following way. Whether Tathagatas arise or not, that principle of specific conditionality is constant, certain, and a law of nature. Having fully awakened to and penetrated to this truth, a Tathagata announces it, teaches it, clarifies it, formulates it, reveals it, and analyzes it. And he says, see, with ignorance as condition, there are volitional formations. Thus, bhikkhus, this actuality, this inerrancy, this invariability, this specific conditionality, this is called dependent origination. The central importance of dependent origination is evident from the Buddha's words. One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma. One who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination. Bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple has a knowledge about this that is independent of others. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When a noble disciple thus understands as they really are the origin and the passing away of the world, he is then called a noble disciple, perfected in view, perfected in vision, who has arrived at this true Dhamma, who possesses a trainee's knowledge, a trainee's true knowledge, who has entered the stream of Dhamma, a noble one with penetrative wisdom, one who stands squarely before the door to the deathless. Those ascetics and Brahmins who understand these things, i.e. the factors of dependent origination, the origin of these things, the cessation of these things, and the way leading to the cessation of these things, those ascetics and Brahmins are deserving of the acknowledgement as ascetics among ascetics, and Brahmins among Brahmins. By realizing it for themselves with direct knowledge, they are recognized as, in this very life, reaching and abiding in the goal of asceticism and the goal of Brahmanhood. On one occasion, the Buddha warned Venerable Ananda not to misjudge the complexity of dependent origination. Ananda: it is wonderful, Venerable Sir, it is marvellous, Venerable Sir. This dependent origination is so deep and appears so deep. Yet to me it seems clear and easy to understand. Buddha: not so, Ananda, not so, Ananda. This dependent origination is deep and appears deep. It is because of not understanding and not penetrating this truth that this generation is afflicted and become like a tangled skein, like a knotted ball of thread, like matted reeds and rushes, and is unable to transcend the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the lower worlds, and the round of rebirth, samsara. Readers who are familiar with the Buddha's life story will remember his reluctance soon after his awakening to proclaim the Dhamma. Bhikkhus, this thought arose in me. This Dhamma that I have attained is profound, difficult to see, difficult to realize, peaceful, excellent, not accessible by reasoning, to be known by the wise. But this generation delights in attachment, takes pleasure in attachment, rejoices in attachment. It is hard for such a generation delighting in attachment to see this truth, namely, specific conditionality, dependent origination. And it is hard to see this truth, namely, the stilling of all formations, the abandonment of all formations for suffering, the end of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. If I were to teach the Dhamma and others would not truly understand me, that would be wearying and troublesome for me. This passage mentions both dependent origination and nibbana, emphasizing both the importance of these two truths and also the difficulty in realizing them. The Buddha awakened to these truths and explained them to others. 3. Interpretations of dependent origination. The teaching of dependent origination may be summarized as follows. 1. An explanation describing the evolution of the world and the cycle of all life by interpreting some of the Buddha's words in a more literal way. For example, the Buddha's teaching on the origin of the world. 2. An explanation describing the birth and death of human beings and the origin and cessation of human suffering. This explanation can be subdivided into two further categories. A broad description of one life to another, the passing from one realm of existence to another. This is also a literal explanation, and it is commonly found in the commentaries, where it is systemized and described in great and sometimes intimidating detail. B. A description of a cycle present at each moment of life. This description offers an interpretation of this teaching implicit in the previous description, 2a, but it focuses on a deeper meaning of specific Pali terms, or on their practical significance. This interpretation explains the whole cycle of dependent origination in terms of present experience, which is considered to be in line with the Buddha's intention and the real objective of his teaching, as evidenced by many discourses of the Buddha, including the Cetana Sutta, the Dukkha Nirodha Sutta, and the Loka Nirodha Sutta. In the Abhidhamma, an entire section is dedicated to the complete sequence of dependent origination arising in a single mind moment. In reference to explanation number 1, some people interpret dependent origination as a theory of the origin of the universe, declaring ignorance as a first cause in a process followed and completed by the remaining 11 factors. This interpretation leads to the view that Buddhism resembles other religions and philosophies that posit a prime agent, for example a creator god, who is the source of all beings and all things. According to this interpretation, the only difference is that these theistic doctrines portray the creation and governing of the world by a force outside and above nature, while Buddhism describes a causal, natural process. This interpretation, however, is inaccurate, because any teaching that professes a first cause or prime agent contradicts the teaching of dependent origination or of specific conditionality. The teaching of dependent origination offers an objective account of causality, that all conditioned things are interrelated and interdependent. They arise in a successive causal process without beginning or end. A first cause, either a creator god or other agent, is impossible. Therefore, the explanation of dependent origination as describing the evolution of the world is only suitable in the context of explaining a natural causal process of continual growth and disintegration without beginning and without end. One way of determining whether an interpretation of dependent origination is correct or not is to consider the Buddha's intention in teaching the Dhamma. The Buddha focused on things that can be applied to bring about well-being, that are relevant to everyday life and that solve real-life problems. He considered attempts to reach the truth through metaphysical speculation and debate to be fruitless. Determining what is truly Buddhadhamma thus requires a consideration of a teaching's ethical and practical view. The worldview that stems from explanation number 1 of dependent origination above is suitable with accords with the aims of Buddhadhamma. It provides a broad perspective that things proceed according to cause and effect, that they depend on natural conditions, and that they neither originate from a creator god nor do they arise randomly or by accident. Moreover, it is conducive to bringing about the following 3 practical benefits. First, one realizes that to find success and fulfillment, one cannot rely on hope, desire, fate, divine intervention, or supernatural powers. One only reaches success through concerted action. One must be self-reliant and generate the conditions that lead to success. Second, to generate these conditions, one must properly understand each factor within the dynamic of nature in which one is engaged, as well as understanding the mutual relationship between factors. Wisdom is therefore an essential element in the process. Third, the knowledge of causal connections reduces or eliminates the mistaken identification with things as a fixed self. This knowledge promotes an appropriate relationship to things and leads to inner freedom. Although the explanation of dependent origination as describing a beginningless and endless evolution of the world is accepted, its practical value is limited. It is not yet sufficiently cogent or integrated to guarantee the 3 benefits mentioned above. especially the third benefit of promoting freedom. To truly profit from this broad interpretation of dependent origination, one must refine one's investigation by discerning the causal interdependent nature of all conditioned phenomena. When one develops this clarity in every moment of one's life, the three benefits mentioned earlier are complete, and at the same time one reaches the true objective of the interpretation related to the evolution of the world. The explanation of dependent origination as the evolution of the world, either in its broadest sense or in a more refined way, is a contemplation of external phenomena. The second explanation, on the other hand, emphasizes the internal life of human beings, including the dynamic of human suffering. The first subdivision, 2a, is favoured by the commentaries, where it is explained in great detail. The commentaries coin many new descriptive terms for this process in order to construct a clear, organised system. The disadvantage, however, is that this system can appear inflexible and, to students new to Buddhism, rather arcane. The second subdivision, 2b, is directly linked to the first 2a, as will be described below.